Hi, I'm a woman in my 30s, and this is the story of how I built up my fiancé's dream business, only to be betrayed in the most brutal way possible. When the man I had promised to marry told me he wanted to start his own company, I never imagined it was a path we wouldn't walk together. We were already planning our wedding. He was my future husband, so naturally, I trusted him completely. I stood by his side, helped him, supported him, and waited patiently. I believed that was my role. My duty, as his partner. I was ready to celebrate with all my heart on the day his business was set to launch. But the words he said to me that day invalidated every moment of time and every piece of my heart I had invested in him. It was the day I learned just how pathetic your life can become when you put your faith in the wrong person. When he told me he was starting a company, I was prepared to laugh with him in success and to stand by him even in failure. I truly, genuinely loved and believed in him. That's why I supported him without asking a single question. But on the day of his grand opening, in front of a crowd of people, the words I heard from him were a bombshell declaration. Pointing to another woman, he announced, "I'm going to marry this person." My fiancé shattered my heart in an instant, after all the support and encouragement I had given him. But there was one thing he didn't know. The one person who held the power to make or break his entire business was me and my father. And for his betrayal, I made him pay a price he would never forget. Here is the story of what happened that day, piece by piece. I met my now ex-fiancé, Mark, through a mutual friend. Our first few dates were ordinary, in the best way. He was quiet, but every word he spoke was thoughtful and clear. I got the impression that he wasn't someone who lived his life carelessly. After a few more dates, we naturally fell into a relationship. While we were dating, what stood out most about him was his attitude toward his work. At the time, he was just an ordinary office worker, but his dedication was extraordinary. He was someone who knew how to love what he did. Instead of complaining about difficulties, he would often say things like, "This will all be valuable experience later." He never took shortcuts or did a half-hearted job. Then one day, he opened up to me about his dream. "Someday, I'm going to start a company with my name on it. It's been my dream since I was a kid." He smiled as he spoke so simply about his ambition, and it was a beautiful sight. I couldn't help but smile with him. It didn't feel like a vague fantasy of success. It felt like he was calmly explaining a goal he had cherished for a long time. In a way, I thought he was incredibly pure. Everyone has goals and dreams, of course. But there was something so genuine about a man who held on to a childhood dream and was actively working to make it a reality, growing himself with a single-minded focus. And Mark wasn't just talking. He was working tirelessly to achieve that dream. After work, he would come home and read books about business management. On weekends, if there was a promising seminar or networking event, he would never miss it. Even on his days off, he'd be on his laptop organizing ideas or driving around town doing market research by himself. Watching him, my feelings grew from affection to something closer to deep respect. He wasn't just a man who talked about big dreams. He was a man who was actively pouring his own time and energy into making them come true. We all know how incredibly difficult that is, right? With that kind of determination and effort, I became convinced that he would one day achieve his dream. They say hard work never betrays you. After all, sometimes I worried he was pushing himself too hard, but whenever I mentioned it, he'd say, "You might see it as suffering, but I'm fine." The harder you work for something, the more valuable it is when you get it, right? Besides, the hard work I do now will mean less hardship later. This is all just building a foundation for the future. Hearing that would reaffirm my belief in him. This man was going to make something of himself someday. Just watching him filled me with anticipation. I became his biggest supporter, and slowly, I began to see his dream not just as his own, but as our shared future. I never could have imagined that very dream would one day be used as a weapon to cast me aside. As time went on, Mark and I naturally started talking about marriage. We hadn't even been dating a full year, but we were both in our 30s, and this wasn't a casual fling. It felt right to start preparing for our future together. So, I decided to introduce him to my parents and brought him home. Suddenly, I was worried. What if my parents didn't like him? You see, Mark was practically an orphan. I didn't know this at first. I learned about his circumstances gradually as we dated. His parents had divorced when he was very young, and afterward, they both essentially abandoned him at his grandmother's house and went their separate ways. He never knew where his biological parents were after that. His grandmother was his entire world. Mark told me he had a difficult childhood, raised by his grandmother who had very little money. I can only imagine how hard it must have been for her to raise a grandson on her own, but she never gave up on him and did her absolute best. That's why Mark was so driven to succeed. He wanted to become successful as quickly as possible so he could repay his grandmother for her sacrifices. Despite his difficult environment, he studied hard with that single goal in mind, finished college, and got a decent job. Not long after he started working, his grandmother's health began to decline, and she passed away that same year. From that point on, he was truly alone. No relatives, no family to lean on, literally left on his own in the world. He told me the sense of loss was overwhelming. His primary motivation had been to succeed and give his grandmother a good life. But she was gone before he could. He said he almost gave up, but then he thought that his grandmother, watching from heaven, wouldn't want that. Even though he couldn't show her his success while she was alive, he held on to the belief that she was watching over him. He wanted to succeed to make her proud. Wherever she was, that was why he never gave up on his dream. At first, I had just seen him as a man incredibly dedicated to his ambition, but it was more than that. His grandmother was the reason behind his dream. Hearing him tell this story so calmly, I felt a profound sense of respect for him. He could have easily gone down the wrong path given his circumstances, but he didn't. He finished his education, got a job, and was living an honest, hard-working life. In contrast, I came from a comfortable background. Both of my parents are alive and well, and our family is financially stable. That's why I was so worried about introducing him. I was scared my parents might object to our marriage because of his background, but to my relief, my parents saw him for who he was. "That young man is so sincere and has a clear head on his shoulders," my father said. "I like his attitude, how he sets a goal and goes straight for it." "I agree," my mother added. "It would have been so easy to get into trouble in his situation, but he grew up to be a fine man." When Mark told them about his dream to one day start a company in his own name, my parents nodded in approval. They said having a dream was a wonderful thing, and they were impressed by his reasons for pursuing it. They were especially pleased that he wasn't just talking, but actively preparing for it. Seeing the warm, approving looks on my parents' faces that day, I felt a huge sense of relief. I had found a man approved by my parents, a man who hadn't lost himself despite a harsh life. I was certain I had made the right choice. I believed that with this man, I could face any hardship that life might throw at us, and we would overcome it together for the rest of our lives. I had no idea that this very belief would become the blade that would wound me most deeply. After getting my parents' blessing, we began planning our wedding. We talked about venues, our new home, all the practical details were falling into place, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. Then, something unexpected happened. The company Mark worked for ran into financial trouble, and he was suddenly laid off. At first, Mark was clearly shaken. He hadn't seen it coming at all, and the timing, right in the middle of our wedding preparations, made it even worse. But he didn't wallow in despair. After a few days of collecting himself, he started looking for another job, updating his resume and staying busy. One evening, my dad brought something up carefully. "Since things turned out this way, instead of looking for another job, why not start your business now?" Both Mark and I were speechless for a moment. My dad continued, "You were going to do it eventually anyway, right? Whether you save up money and do it later or start now, you're going to do it. Starting now might be the better opportunity." Then, he added the crucial part. "If you're hesitating because you lack the funds, we can help." My parents were financially well off and were more than capable of helping their future son-in-law, but Mark immediately shook his head. "I appreciate you even thinking of it, but I feel terrible accepting that kind of help." It was clear he was hesitant. Even though we were about to become family, accepting such a significant amount of help was a huge deal. He also said that starting a business with my parents' money wouldn't feel like his own success. But my parents gently persuaded him. They argued that if he waited, it might be too late. It was better to start while he was younger. Even if he failed, they said, he would still have the strength to get back up again. They explained that they were just providing the seed money to get started. The success or failure of the business would be entirely up to him. Wouldn't that still be your own success? My father asked. And if you feel that burdened by it, you can just pay us back when you're successful. Mark was silent for a long time. I could see the conflict on his face, the weight of the offer versus the fear of missing the opportunity. After a long moment of deliberation, he finally agreed to accept my parents' offer. He said he felt both terrible and incredibly grateful for their help. From that day on, Mark worked even harder. He stopped his job search and began to flesh out his business plan in earnest. He created presentations, met with people, and threw himself into preparing for the launch. I felt so proud watching him. I hoped my parents' generosity would become the greatest opportunity of his life, an opportunity that would lead to our bright future together. I worried about him, though. He would be glued to his laptop late into the night, studying and working. He was busy on weekdays and didn't rest on weekends. While I admired his drive, I was afraid he would burn out or get sick. So, I did what I could. I bought him vitamins and cooked meals and snacks he could easily eat, filling his refrigerator. I thought my job was to take care of the little things, making sure he ate properly, slept enough, and wasn't getting sick. As I took care of him, I naturally began to see the state of his finances. With no income and all his energy focused on the business, he was clearly struggling to make ends meet. He never said anything directly, but I could tell he was tightening his belt and just getting by. It bothered me immensely. So, I tried to help in a way that wouldn't hurt his pride. I would slip cash into his wallet when he wasn't looking, or tuck my credit card inside. My parents were funding the business startup, but that didn't cover his day-to-day living expenses. I knew it must be hard for him. I couldn't just hand him cash or a card outright. He was too proud and would feel burdened. He had already been so hesitant to accept my parents' help with the business. I didn't want to add to that. But one day, after seeing his completely empty wallet, my heart sank. I took all the cash I had in my own wallet and put it in his. I also tucked my credit card in, thinking he'd need it for expenses while running around town. A few days later, he must have found it. He came to me with a flustered look on his face. Did you put money and a card in my wallet? I couldn't think of anyone else who would do that. I tried to act casual. You can't be struggling while you're trying to get this business off the ground. I put it there secretly because I knew you'd feel bad. I can afford it, so please don't feel burdened. Just use it when you need it. At my words, he was silent for a long moment, then lowered his head. He said that even though we were getting married, he felt terrible for taking so much from me and my parents before we were even officially husband and wife. He kept repeating how sorry he was. Seeing him like that only made me care for him more. Don't think like that, I told him. We're about to be a family, a married couple. There's no yours and mine between us. When I said that, he started to cry. With a face full of emotion, he kept repeating, "I'm sorry and thank you." He promised me that he would make the business a huge success and repay me for everything. He said that after his grandmother died, he thought he had no one left in the world to rely on, but now he felt like he already had a new, wonderful family supporting him. He smiled through his tears and said he was a truly happy man. Hearing those words made my heart ache in a good way. So, he started living on the money I gave him. At first, he was very hesitant and apologetic about using it, but as time went on, things began to change. At some point, he started to bring it up first, albeit still with some hesitation. "I'm a little short on living expenses this month. Could you help me buy this?" he'd ask. Or, "I'm so sorry to ask, but I think things will get better once we get past this initial phase." He always added that he was sorry, but he was gradually getting more comfortable asking for help. And every time he did, he would promise me, "I'll make it big and pay you back for everything. I'll make sure people call you a CEO's wife." Those words always made me smile. Not because I wanted to be a CEO's wife. I would have been perfectly fine without that title as long as I was with him. I was just relieved that he didn't feel so burdened anymore. I told him not to suffer in silence and to always be honest with me. I figured if he was asking for money, he must really be in a tough spot. I was just glad I could be there to support him. I felt that standing by him was my role, and I believed that enduring this time together would only make our bond stronger. As time passed, The business preparations were nearing their final stages. He had secured an office space, finalized his product line, and had a rough date for the launch. But around that time, I noticed a distinct change in his expression. He had always been the type to stay positive even when things were tough, but he became quiet, and I often found him staring blankly into space. Feeling anxious, I asked him gently, "You seem down lately. Is something wrong? Are you not feeling well?" After a long hesitation, he finally confessed what was on his mind. He said that even if he launched the business, he needed clients lined up to work with from day one. He had been trying to secure a few contracts before the grand opening, but he wasn't having any luck. I told him not to rush, that he could build his client base gradually after the launch, but he said he needed at least some income right after opening. He was worried that if he didn't, he would have to keep relying on me financially, and he felt terrible about it. He had already knocked on many doors, but companies were hesitant to work with a brand new startup. He felt defeated, wondering how he could possibly succeed after opening if he was already hitting a wall. He sounded so discouraged and small. His words weighed heavily on my heart. I knew how hard he had been working, so I could feel the depth of his frustration, but as I watched him worry, I couldn't just say it'll be okay. Up until then, I had been able to support him financially, but with the wedding planning, I was covering most of the costs for our new home, the furniture, and everything else. Frankly, I was at my limit, and I couldn't ask my parents for more help. They had already contributed a significant amount for our new house and were funding his entire business. Asking for more would have been shameless, so I was trying to figure out how we could manage the rest on our own. But because Mark had no income, the burden fell entirely on me. There was no way I could continue to support him after the business opened. I was at my breaking point. I must have looked visibly stressed, because one day my mom gently asked me what was wrong. I tried to brush it off, not wanting to worry her, but she persisted. She had seen her happy wedding-planning daughter suddenly become gloomy, so of course she was concerned. She worried that Mark and I were having problems. Under her gentle questioning, I finally told her everything. My mom listened without saying a word, and when I was done, she sighed with me, sharing my worry. That evening, she told my dad. A few days later, my dad called me aside. "Your uncle is going to help with the client issue." I was stunned. It turned out my dad, after hearing our situation from my mom, had spoken to my uncle. I had no idea until that moment that my uncle was in a position to help with business connections. Dad calmly told me he had asked my uncle, and that he would take care of it. Hearing those words, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying pressed down on my chest. I had been trying so hard not to rely on my parents anymore, but they had been working behind the scenes to help me all along. I felt a mix of gratitude and guilt. With my uncle's help, Mark's problem seemed like it would be easily solved. It was a relief, but I felt even more indebted to my parents. I told them I would pay them back for everything, but they just shook their heads. "Parents don't help their children expecting something in return," my mother said. "Seeing the two of you happy is all we need." At those words, my eyes filled with tears. I lowered my head, choked up, and just kept repeating, "Thank you." I promised them I would live happily, just as they wished. It was a promise to them and a vow to myself. Once I had collected myself, I was excited to tell Mark the good news. But just as I was about to call him, I hesitated. Would this just make him feel more burdened? He had already received so much from my family. Learning this might make him feel more inadequate than relieved. My parents had the same concern. My mom said it could just add more pressure right before a major launch, and that it's never comfortable to always be on the receiving end. After discussing it, we decided not to tell Mark for the time being. We told my uncle the same thing, asking him to help quietly from the background, as if he were a completely unrelated third party. My uncle readily agreed. With everything carefully arranged, I just hoped this opportunity would help Mark regain his confidence. And it did. A short while later, there was a noticeable, positive change in him. One day, he called me, his voice filled with excitement. "Clients are starting to come in from everywhere," he said, repeating the words several times as if he couldn't believe it. Hearing him, I felt a surge of pride. I knew how much he had struggled, and I knew how much this small success meant to him. I smiled and said, "See? You didn't give up, and look what happened. Good things are coming your way." He agreed, laughing with relief. As I watched him, I silently thanked my uncle and my parents. The truth, of course, remained our secret. With contracts to negotiate, Mark became busier than ever. He barely had time for anything else. But one day, he came to me with a serious expression and asked if we could postpone the wedding. Our wedding. Can we push it back just a little? I was honestly stunned. Our plans were already well underway, and the wedding was only a few months away. I immediately asked him why. He began to persuade me, calmly but firmly. "You know how important this business is to me. The period right after the launch is the most critical time. I need to focus completely on work. We're going to get married anyway. It won't be too late to do it after the business is a little more stable." Logically, he wasn't wrong. Juggling last-minute wedding preparations during the crucial launch phase could cause him to drop the ball, but I couldn't help but feel a little hurt. Did our wedding mean so little compared to his business? My mind was a mess. I understood his point, but I could still be supportive even if we got married as planned. I wouldn't be a distraction. Plus, it felt disrespectful to our parents. I tried to reason with him. "I can still help you just as much after we're married, and I'll work even harder on the wedding plans so you don't have to worry about them. I know it's an important time, but I don't think we need to postpone." But Mark wouldn't give in. He sighed, took my hands, and looked at me earnestly. He kept repeating he was sorry, but he didn't budge. "I know I'm being selfish, and I'm sorry, but I'm starting this business with your help and your parents' help. I can't let it fail. I really want to do this right. To be honest, the weight of everything you've all given me is immense, and I've been worrying about how to repay it. I can't be distracted by wedding planning at such a critical moment. I need to be all in." He insisted that he had to be completely focused and that he couldn't bear to disappoint everyone. He promised it wouldn't be a long delay, just a few more months. His face was that of someone who had already made up his mind. I ran out of arguments. It felt like nothing I said would change his mind. I knew better than anyone how much this business meant to him, how desperately he wanted to succeed. Pushing back against his desire to work harder, to not disappoint us, felt selfish. In the end, I could only nod. "Okay, I understand." I didn't know then if those words were to reassure him or to convince myself. But one thing was clear. That day, an invisible crack began to form between us. So, at Mark's request, I postponed our wedding by several months. It would be a lie to say I wasn't upset, but I told myself it was unavoidable given the circumstances. I tried to be positive, thinking of it as having more time to plan the perfect wedding. With that mindset, I started to meticulously review and finalize the details, intending to discuss them with Mark. But Mark seemed to get busier and busier. He said the final stretch before the launch was like a war zone. Our phone calls became shorter. Eventually, I was the one making all the decisions about the venue, the caterer, and every other detail, all by myself. It was impossible to pin him down for a discussion. Other couples get to plan their weddings together, laughing and making memories. I was doing it all alone, researching, worrying, and deciding by myself. Sometimes, it made me feel incredibly lonely. I understood his position, but I couldn't help the pangs of sadness. But I tried my best not to show it, because I knew he already felt guilty. I just told myself that the business was the priority right now, and that everything would go back to normal after the grand opening. As the launch date drew near, Mark became even more frantic. His calls and texts became noticeably infrequent, and seeing him in person became impossible. I was worried, curious, and most of all, I missed him. I tried visiting him a few times, but he was never at his apartment or at the new office. He seemed to be constantly on the move, putting out fires. So I stopped trying. I was afraid that calling or showing up would just be a distraction. All I could do was wait. At the time, I truly believed that this period of waiting would soon be over. I was convinced that after the launch party, we would go back to how we were before. It wouldn't take long for me to realize just how foolish that belief was. The beginning of the end came a few days later, with a phone call from my uncle. He called to ask, "Mark's grand opening is next Thursday, right?" "Yes, that's right," I replied. "That's strange," he said. The business owners I connected him with told me the opening is on a different day than what you told me. That can't be right, I said. He told me it was next week. Well, the date I heard from them is this Wednesday, my uncle insisted. Mark told them that himself. My mind went into a tailspin. How could this be? Why was the date he told me different? I told my uncle I would check and immediately called Mark, but he didn't answer. I sent him a text. Call me when you see this. Hours passed with no reply. Frustrated, I tried calling again. This time, a text came through immediately. Busy with work right now. If it's not urgent, I'll call you later. Was he really so busy that he couldn't even take a quick call? I felt I couldn't push him any further. I started to second-guess myself. Did I get the date wrong? Was I so distracted with wedding planning that I misremembered? No matter how hard I tried to recall, I was sure he had told me the date I had in my head. But my confidence began to waver. Eventually, I concluded that I must have been mistaken. Since Mark still hadn't called back, I called my uncle and told him I was probably wrong and that this week was likely correct. A few days later, the Wednesday my uncle had mentioned arrived. It was Mark's grand opening. This was the day both he and I had been waiting for. I woke up excited, carefully picking out my outfit and doing my makeup. I felt like this was the day all our hard work would finally pay off. I grabbed the gift I had bought for him, and my parents and I headed to the venue. When we arrived, my parents went to park the car. They said they needed to pick something up nearby and told me to go on ahead. So I walked into the building alone. Inside, the party was already in full swing. The place was packed. Strangers were bustling about, and people were busy taking photos in front of the large floral arrangements. And there, in the middle of it all, was Mark. He was dressed in a sharp suit, a bright smile on his face as he shook hands and thanked guests. My heart swelled with pride. I smiled and took a step toward him, but then I froze. A woman had walked up to him, and with a familiar ease, she looped her arm through his. It was so natural. It was clear this wasn't their first or second time together. Who is that? I thought. Why is she holding my fiancé's arm like that? What was even more baffling was Mark's reaction. Normally, he would have at least been surprised and pulled his arm away. But he didn't flinch. He showed no sign of discomfort. He just kept smiling. A moment later, he even affectionately tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. My mind went blank. I stood there, rooted to the spot, just staring at them. Then, I heard the woman call out to Mark, "Honey." In that instant, it felt like time stopped. The word hit me, and my legs gave out. The gift I was holding slipped from my grasp and fell to the floor with a loud thud. The sound echoed through the room, and suddenly, all eyes were on me. I didn't care. Mark and the woman turned to look. The moment he saw me, his expression hardened. It wasn't shock or guilt. It was annoyance. A look that said, "This is a problem I don't want to deal with." He took a breath and walked toward me. As the crowd's murmuring grew, he paid them no mind. He stopped right in front of me and spoke in a low, icy voice. "What are you doing here?" That one question fried every circuit in my brain. No apology, no explanation, no shock, just that. I was so stunned I could barely speak. "Is this a place I'm not supposed to be?" I asked, glancing at the woman behind him. "Is it because of her? Stop talking nonsense and answer my question," he snapped. "I never told you or your family the opening was today. How did you find out?" At that moment, I knew. I hadn't gotten the date wrong. I ignored his question and asked again, "You didn't tell me because of her, didn't you?" "Who is she?" He took a short breath, and without a hint of hesitation, he said, "The woman I'm going to marry." "What? The woman he's going to marry?" I thought I must have misheard. Before I could ask again, he elaborated as if stating a simple fact. "She's my fiancé." The words struck me like a physical blow. I couldn't process what I was hearing, where I was. My senses were scrambled. "Then, what am I?" I managed to ask. He looked at me for a moment, then delivered the final, cruelest line. "Someone who doesn't matter." My hand moved before my brain could. Without thinking, I slapped him hard across the face. The room went silent for a beat, then erupted in whispers. Mark held his cheek for a second, his eyes darting around at the onlookers. He gritted his teeth and glared at me. Are you crazy? He hissed. What the hell do you think you're doing? What am I doing? I screamed back, ignoring the staring crowd. What are you doing? How am I someone who doesn't matter? I'm the one you're supposed to be marrying. I'm your fiancé. How could you do this? Do you have any idea who you have to thank for getting this far? For a brief second, his face contorted. But it wasn't guilt. It was irritation. He glanced around again, then stepped closer to me. He leaned in, putting his mouth next to my ear so no one else could hear. That's why I was going to take care of you, he whispered venomously. That was your parents' money anyway, not yours. They're the ones who offered. And now you're acting all high and mighty? I'll give you a cut when the business is successful. So stop ruining a good day and get out. In that instant, all the puzzle pieces clicked into place. The missed calls, the request to postpone the wedding, the secret grand opening. He already had another woman. He was planning to marry her all along. I was just a tool, a stepping stone to launch his business, someone he could pretend to be sorry and grateful to when he needed something, and then discard with a payoff when I was no longer useful. The realization didn't bring tears. Instead, my rage turned cold and settled deep in my stomach. I looked him straight in the eye. Fine, I said. Then give back every single cent my parents gave you to start this business. All of it. Now. Then I'll leave. The smirk vanished from his face. After a moment of silence, he let out a disbelieving laugh. Are you serious? You want money from someone who just opened their business today? It's all gone. I spent it all. I don't care, I said, my voice like ice. Figure it out. If you don't have the cash, then liquidate this place right now and get the deposit back. Your business is going to fail anyway. I'll make sure of it. If you don't pay up immediately, I'm taking legal action. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Mark's face turned red. He exploded. Who the hell do you think you are, saying my business will fail? Are you trying to jinx my opening day? The crowd stared, but he had lost all control. I was trying to be nice for old time's sake, but you just had to push it, he yelled, stepping toward me and raising his hand to strike me. Just then, a hand shot out from behind me and grabbed his wrist in midair. It was my father. Mark's eyes widened in shock as he turned his head. Without a moment's hesitation, my father twisted Mark's arm and threw him to the floor. You dare deceive my daughter, and now you raise a hand to her? My father's voice was steady, but filled with cold fury. You have until the end of this week to return every dollar of the investment money. I gave you that money so you could build a life with my daughter, not to pull a stunt like this. Mark, scrambling on the floor, managed a twisted smile. I already told you. It's gone. What are you going to do? Sue me? Go ahead, he sneered, getting back on his feet. People break up. It happens. Why are you making such a big deal out of it? Besides, he said, his voice getting louder and more arrogant, I didn't threaten her for the money. You're the ones who offered it. Technically, it was a gift. I don't have to pay it back. Go ahead and sue. I'll countersue you for harassing me at my own launch party in front of all my future clients and business partners. I will not let this go. At that moment, a calm, low voice cut through the tension from behind us. You'll regret that. Everyone turned. Standing there was my uncle, impeccably dressed in a suit. Mark looked at him, bewildered. Who are you to butt in? My uncle introduced himself and then added, I'm the person who helped this young man get his clients. Mark scoffed. What kind of nonsense is that? I got my clients by pounding the pavement myself. My uncle let out a short, humorless laugh. He slowly scanned the room, his eyes landing on the remaining guests. All the business owners here today. I know every single one of them. The air went still. My uncle turned his gaze back to Mark. They're helping you because I asked them to, he said calmly. You didn't earn these contracts. They agreed to them as a favor to me. Do you understand now? The color drained from Mark's face, leaving it a sickly white. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, as if hoping I would deny it. I just stared back at him with pure contempt. My uncle delivered the final blow. I feel like a fool for asking them to help a piece of trash like you, and I'm sure they feel the same way now. I doubt any of them will want to continue their association with you. In fact, he said, his voice dropping, I expect those contracts will be canceled." As if on cue, the business owners in the crowd started clearing their throats, avoiding Mark's gaze. Some walked out immediately, others shot him a furious look, gave my uncle a curt nod, and then followed. Mark, in a panic, tried to stop them, but it was useless. "Every contract you have will be terminated," my uncle continued, his voice relentless. "And you won't find a single new client. I have deep and wide connections in this industry. I can have you blacklisted so fast your head will spin. You will never work in this field again. So forget your grand opening. Shut it all down and get my family's money back." Hearing this, Mark's legs buckled, and he collapsed to the floor. The arrogant, sneering man from moments ago was gone, replaced by a completely broken shell. My parents, my uncle, and I left without another word. That day, everything began. My father immediately hired a lawyer and started legal proceedings. He sought the full return of the business capital, plus reimbursement for every dollar I had spent on Mark's living expenses. And not surprisingly, from that day forward, Mark's business imploded. The clients who had been shaking his hand and smiling at the launch party all cut contact. Scheduled meetings were all canceled. In the end, Mark had to liquidate the business. He sold the equipment, got back the security deposit, and scraped together everything he possibly could. He showed up at our door, head bowed, and spoke in a tearful, broken voice. "This is all I have right now. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I forgot the grace you showed me. I think I went crazy for a moment. When the business started looking good, when I saw a future, I just lost my mind. Please, just give me one more chance." But my heart was already closed to him forever. "I will never be used by scum like you again," I said, and slammed the door in his face. I later heard that he was struggling to pay back the rest of the money he owed us. I never asked my parents or my uncle for details. I didn't want to know. He was no longer a part of my life. They say a person's true character is revealed not in hardship, but in success. I learned that lesson with a very expensive tuition fee, but I consider myself lucky that it was a broken engagement and not a divorce. I'm ready to leave the scars of the past behind and start fresh. I hope you'll cheer me on. Dear listeners who have accompanied me until the end of my story, how did you find today's tale? I'm curious about the impression it has left in your hearts and the thoughts it has sparked in you. Please feel free to share your impressions and opinions in the comments. I will carefully read each of them. The likes and subscriptions you give me are the greatest source of strength and motivation for creating better stories in the future. Please don't forget to do so. I sincerely wish that your life is always filled with happiness and good fortune, and that the warm light in your hearts never fades.